Good evening and welcome to another episode of the History of Britain. I'm Jamie Gascoigne, and in this programme we're going to of course be talking about football from medieval times to industrial times to modern times. We're going to start with medieval times. We're going to look at how football came to be, what was it like back in the old days, and how did players play. And that is what we're going to look at in the first part of our programme right after this. Welcome back. As I said before, we are going to talk about medieval football. In this programme we're going to talk about everything from the rules to who played it to who organised it. Well, obviously this is medieval times, so it wasn't any big leagues, any Champions League, World Cup like there is today. No, back in the day it was simply played by towns, local villages who played each other. And there was no rules like today. The only rule there was in this time was that there was no murder. But even when murders were committed, a lot of the time the priests wrote for them forgivenesses, so they got off with it. You could say they got away with murder. When we talk about the rules of mob football, you've got to understand is that this was, a very violent game. Like it could be there could be hundreds of players on each side, and the objective of the game was not to score a goal, but it was to pot the ball. It was usually played with a pig bladder as well, usually to hit it against a tree 3 times in one village. So it could be from back and forth all day from villages. And like I say, you could kick it, you could run with it, you could headbutt it, you could punch anyone, you could do whatever you want, as long as you didn't murder someone. And even then, sometimes you got away with it. Now it got so bad at this point, but in 1314, Edward II tried to ban football, as he claimed it was a waste of energy and a waste of time. It was also tried to be banned in 1331 by Edward III, who said because they were invading Scotland at the time and he didn't want his soldiers to waste time. And once again in 1477 it was tried to be banned again by, you guessed it, Edward IV, who wanted people to practice bowing for defence rather than play this game of football. But most of the time this ban was ignored because it was too popular. And also, when we talk about who organised it, it would usually be local village heads who would organise, they'd get together and they'd say, we want to play you on this. Because obviously they were busy a lot of the time working the fields, so it could only be done a few times each year. And what did they win at the end of this? Well, at the end of the day it was bragging rights, because back in the day there was no idiot box, also known as a television, so they had to entertain themselves by playing this mob football. And obviously bragging rights meant a lot more back then than it did today. Can you imagine Barnsley winning a game and then bragging to Sheffield for weeks on end about how they won the mob football game? That's what it was like back in this day. And that's it for mob football, ladies and gentlemen. And coming up after the break, we've got Jack Wassell talking about the industrial era.
Hello and welcome back, I'm Jack Wassell. Today I'm going to be talking about the industrial era of football. There was a giant change in society as families moved to the city to work in factories, and now rich families had their children going into public schools. And during that time, football continued to be played throughout the 19th century and was still evidently popular in London. England became the first country in the world to codify football. This came from a desire of various public schools wanting to compete against each other, but they had their own rules of the sport. There were previous meetings between school representatives to try and come up with a set of rules that everybody would be happy about. The first attempt was the Cambridge Rules, which were created in 1848, and there were others that created their own sets, like Sheffield FC in 1855. These rules were put into one set in 1863, where the Football Association was formed. Some clubs continued to play under the Sheffield Rules until 1878, and other clubs dissented to form Rugby Union. Early Sheffield Rules were important as a system of offside allowed poaching and then demonstrated the use of a forward pass. The players were known as kick-throughs, as they were positioned permanently near the opposition's goal to receive the ball. They believed that the Sheffield style gave birth to the modern passing game. In 1862 the Sheffield Rules included crossbars, half-times and free kicks that were introduced to their code in 1866. The FA Cup was the first nationally organised competition that began in 1871, where the first winners of the cup were the Wanderers. Back in those days professionalism was banned. The cup was mainly dominated by service teams and all schoolboy teams like Old Etonians. Then the Scottish Football Association split from the FA in 1873. The first international football match was played between England and Scotland on the 30th of November 1872 at the ground of Hamilton Crescent in Partick, Scotland. The game finished though in a goalless draw and was only watched by a crowd of 4,000. A football league founded in 1888 is the oldest football league in the world and is still running today with 72 teams competing in 3 equal divisions. But the first 4 years of when this was started, there was only 12 teams competing in just one league. Currently, most league games are played at 3 PM on a Saturday afternoon. This is because during the British Industrial Revolution, all work went in at 2 PM on a Saturday, so all workers could go and watch the sport that they love today.
Hello, welcome back. I'm Kurt Inchcliffe and I'm going to be talking to you today about the modern era of what we know now as football. We'll start off with the basic rules that we all know. We know we've got 11v11 where 6 substitutions. It's 90 minutes a game, 45 minutes a half with a 15-minute interval. We know once you score it's only 1 point. We know about throw-ins, corner kicks, goal kicks, free kicks, penalties, stuff like that. We know all about the different leagues and that, so you've got the 5 top leagues in England, which will be the Premier League, the Championship, League 1, League 2, and then you've got the Conference on top of that, and then all the other leagues below that are not quite as popular. That's just in England. In all other countries around the world, like America, you have the Major League Soccer. Spain, you have La Liga, and then others in Germany and Portugal, everywhere. Mainly popular in Europe, but you can find football absolutely everywhere. Different competitions on top of the leagues are your cup tournaments, which for clubs you can have in England the FA Cup, Capital One Cup, or your lower leagues, which will have the Johnstone's Paint Trophy, which is for teams in the English League 1 and League 2. A bit more internationally, which will be the Europe Champions League, which is played by the clubs in Europe, with Spain, Sweden, France, Germany, England, Scotland, places like that. And then you've got the secondary one to that, which is the Euros. Internationally, you've got the World Cup, you've got Euros, you've got the Africa Cup of Nations, things like that, which is played on a high international scale by international teams, played by players from that international region. The different variations of football that have come about due to the Football Association wanting to improve participation. The Football Association being football's governing body. You have 5-a-side football played by teams of 5, which can also be done 6-a-side and 7-a-side football. Rules differ for all players really. You have indoor football played indoors, usually sports halls or indoor astroturfs. Masters football, which is for ex-professional footballers over the age of 35. You've got different variations of football for the blind, deaf, amputees and people who suffer cerebral palsy. You've got street football, which is just football played on the street, usually played at a young age, and also beach football, which will be played on a beach. Now I'll go on to talking about sponsorships, where is now a big part in football. Deals are with prices through the roof. A recent deal was £750 million given to Manchester United by Adidas for them to manufacture their clothes and get their brand on their shirt and on their other clothes and merchandise. For the popularity of football, I've already said it is played globally, all over the world. Everybody knows what football is. If you go somewhere very rural and you say Manchester United, most likely they will know exactly what you're talking about. They will know football. As a statistic, 909 million people tuned into the World Cup in 2010 just to watch the final alone. And since then, it's just spectators. Football's still growing even today, despite how popular it already is. That's basically a quick sum up of how modern day football is. Thank you.
Well, there you have it for this edition of The History of Britain. I've been Jamie Gascoigne, and I have a special thanks to Jack Wassell and Kurt Hinchcliffe. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and good night.